Ladies and gentlemen, today I want to talk about something that doesn't always happen in public, but happens far too often behind closed doors. It's not about love stories that make it to social media. It's about the quiet pain that hides behind the perfect pictures, when a husband, full of himself, forgets what it means to love someone, and instead learns how to use them. Now, this isn't just about blame. It's about awareness. Because until we can name the wound, we can't begin to heal it. So if you've ever wondered what it feels like, or what it looks like, when a narcissistic husband treats his wife, stay with me. Because today we're not just going to expose the pattern, we're going to talk about how to rise above it. Control disguised as care is one of the most dangerous tactics a narcissistic husband uses. It never starts as control. It starts as protection. It sounds like love. It feels like safety. So when I'm tired, meaning anxious, he says things like, I just worry about you, or I don't like it when you talk to him. It doesn't feel right. At first, it seems like he's being attentive, maybe even sweet. But slowly, that concern becomes a leash. What he calls caring begins to shape what she wears, who she meets, how she spends her time, and even how she speaks. Every decision starts passing through the filter of his approval, and she learns to anticipate his reactions before making a move. This form of control is subtle because it hides behind the language of love. He doesn't shout or demand in the beginning. He suggests, he advises, he just wants the best. But behind those words is an agenda, to make her smaller, quieter, and more dependent on him. Over time, she starts questioning her own judgment, thinking maybe he's right, maybe she does need guidance. The manipulation works because it's slow, steady, and wrapped in affection. What makes it even more painful is how convincing it looks from the outside. To friends and family, he might appear like the perfect, caring husband, always looking out for her, always by her side. But inside the relationship, she feels the walls closing in. The freedom she once had is replaced by fear of disappointing him. What's in that in true? There's a thought. What three? She starts confusing control with love because that's how he taught her to see it. What began as concern becomes confinement. What began as care becomes control. And she doesn't even realize when she stopped being cared for and started being controlled. Gaslighting, rewriting her reality, is one of the most insidious tools a narcissistic husband uses to maintain dominance and power. It is not loud, it is not always obvious, and it doesn't always come with visible scars. It is psychological warfare that leaves a woman doubting her memory, her perception, and eventually her sanity. It begins with small, almost invisible distortions of truth. He might deny saying something she clearly remembers, or insist she agreed to something she never did. When she pushes back, he acts surprised, offended, or amused. He might tell her, "You're imagining things," or "You're too sensitive." Over time, these small denials start to accumulate, and she begins to question her own sense of reality. At first, she tries to defend herself logically. She replays conversations in her head, checks her messages, tries to find proof that she isn't losing her mind. But the narcissist doesn't argue to find truth. He argues to win. Each time she tries to clarify, he twists the narrative again, making her feel foolish for even trying. His goal is not to convince her that he's right, but to make her uncertain that she ever could be. That uncertainty gives him control. Once she starts to doubt herself, he doesn't have to dominate her openly. She starts to police her own thoughts for him. Gaslighting often comes disguised as concern, the same way control hides behind care. He might say, "I'm only telling you this because I love you," or, "You get things mixed up sometimes." The tone is calm, even gentle, which makes it even more disorienting. She feels wrong for feeling hurt. She wonders if she is overreacting, if maybe he's right. That self-doubt is exactly what he wants. Every time she apologizes for something she didn't do, every time she walks away from an argument confused instead of clear, the gaslight burns brighter. What makes gaslighting particularly cruel is how it erodes a woman's relationship with herself. She stops trusting her emotions. She second-guesses her instincts. When she's hurt, she tells herself she shouldn't be. When she's angry, she believes she's being dramatic. The narcissistic husband creates a world where his version of events is the only version allowed, and she learns to live inside it. It becomes a form of mental captivity, where her thoughts no longer feel like her own. To the outside world, everything seems fine. He is charming, articulate, and often presents himself as the calm one in the relationship. If she ever tries to explain what's happening, she might be met with disbelief. People might say he doesn't seem that way, or you're lucky to have someone who cares. That reaction isolates her even more, reinforcing the idea that she must be the problem. The narcissist thrives on that illusion, being seen as the stable one while she appears unstable. It's a carefully built image that protects him and silences her. Over time, she begins to lose the sense of who she was before him. The confident, intuitive, strong version of herself fades under the constant weight of confusion and self-doubt. Even simple choices feel heavy. What to wear, what to say, how to respond. She fears that any small misstep will be used as proof of her incompetence or emotional instability. She begins to live on edge, always adjusting, always trying to anticipate what version of him she'll get that day. Some days, he's kind and attentive. Other days, cold and cruel. The inconsistency keeps her off balance, and that's exactly where he wants her. Unsure, apologetic, and dependent on him for clarity. Gaslighting doesn't just distort facts. It distorts identity. It makes her question her worth, her intelligence, and even her memories. It's like living in a hall of mirrors, where everything is slightly bent but never completely broken, and she keeps trying to fix the reflection instead of realizing the mirrors were built to deceive her. She may find herself apologizing for things she didn't do, accepting blame for things she didn't cause, or believing stories that never happened. Each apology deepens his control. Each moment of confusion strengthens his authority. Eventually, she begins to measure truth by his reaction rather than by her own perception. If he says it happened, it must have. If he says she's wrong, she must be. That's how gaslighting works. It doesn't take her freedom in one violent act. It takes it piece by piece, disguised as conversation, wrapped in concern, until she forgets what her truth even sounds like. Isolation through emotional manipulation is a slow, deliberate process that a narcissistic husband uses to remove his wife's support system while making it seem like it's her choice. It begins subtly, with small comments that plant seeds of doubt about the people around her. He might say, "I don't think your friends really understand you," or "Your family doesn't appreciate how much I do for you." At first, it sounds like he's being protective, but what he is really doing is creating a divide. Each time she pulls away from someone she loves, his influence grows stronger. He doesn't tell her outright to stop seeing people. Instead, he makes her feel guilty when she does. If she wants to spend time with friends, he might sulk, withdraw affection, or start an argument just before she leaves. The emotional cost becomes too high, so she begins to decline invitations, not because she wants to, but because it's easier than dealing with his reaction. He praises her when she stays home, calling her loyal and devoted, reinforcing the idea that her world should revolve around him. As time goes on, she becomes increasingly dependent on him for validation and companionship. Without realizing it, she's been cut off from the people who could remind her of her worth. When she feels lonely, he's there to comfort her, pretending to be the only one who truly understands. That false sense of closeness deepens her isolation even more. Friends eventually stop reaching out, assuming she's too busy or uninterested, and family members back away after too many tense encounters. What began as love turns into loneliness, and she finds herself in a world where her emotions, her choices, and her connections all orbit around him, carefully controlled by the strings of manipulation he designed. Ego over empathy is the foundation of how a narcissistic husband operates in his relationship. Every situation, every disagreement, every emotional moment is filtered through one question in his mind. How does this make me look? His need to be admired outweighs any ability to understand or care about his wife's feelings. When she is hurt, he sees it as an inconvenience. When she succeeds, he feels threatened instead of proud. Her emotions are not something to connect with, but something to control. He views vulnerability as weakness, not realizing that real strength is built through compassion and understanding. In moments where empathy should guide him, his ego takes the lead. If she shares her pain, he shifts the focus back to himself. If she expresses disappointment, he accuses her of being ungrateful. Every attempt at communication becomes a competition. He must win. The idea of taking responsibility feels like defeat, so instead, he blames, deflects, or minimizes. He might say, "You're making a big deal out of nothing," or "You always find something to complain about." These phrases don't come from misunderstanding. They come from a refusal to let empathy interrupt his sense of superiority. The wife, in turn, learns to suppress her emotions to avoid conflict. She stops expressing needs because she knows they will be met with ridicule or rejection. The relationship becomes one-sided, built around his comfort and his image. He thrives on admiration, but cannot give appreciation. He demands loyalty, but offers little compassion. The absence of empathy leaves her emotionally starved, constantly trying to earn kindness from someone who only sees her as an extension of his own ego. What he calls love is actually possession, and what she calls partnership becomes performance, a constant effort to protect his fragile sense of importance. Breaking the cycle begins with awareness, and awareness is something a narcissistic husband works hard to prevent. He thrives in confusion and silence in the spaces where she doubts her own perception. The moment she starts to recognize patterns of manipulation, the balance of power begins to shift. Awareness doesn't come in one dramatic moment. It comes slowly, in pieces, through quiet realization. It starts when she notices how often she apologizes, how often she feels guilty for simply existing, how often she filters her words to avoid his reaction. These small recognitions are the cracks in the armor he built around her mind. Once she begins to see the manipulation for what it is, she also begins to remember who she was before it. She recalls her laughter, her opinions, her independence, the parts of herself that were never truly gone, just buried under fear. Awareness brings discomfort because it forces her to confront the truth she's been trained to ignore. She might feel anger, sadness, or even shame, but those emotions are signs of awakening. The narcissist loses control when she stops accepting his version of reality. Awareness also changes how she reacts. Instead of explaining herself endlessly, she begins to set small boundaries. Instead of believing every insult, she starts to recognize projection. She stops defending herself against lies and starts observing them for what they are: tactics. This mental shift is powerful, even if it doesn't change his behavior. It changes hers. It helps her detach emotionally, to see his cruelty not as a reflection of her worth, but of his insecurity. The cycle that once felt unbreakable begins to loosen. Not because he changed, but because she finally started to see clearly. And clarity is the first step toward freedom. Healing is reclaiming your voice, and for a woman who has lived under the shadow of a narcissistic husband, that voice is often the first thing taken and the last thing rediscovered. For so long, she has been spoken over, corrected, and silenced, until she forgets the sound of her own truth. Healing begins when she starts to speak again, even if her voice shakes, even if no one believes her at first. Every word she says in her own defense is an act of rebellion against the silence he built around her. It's not just about speaking out loud, it's about allowing herself to think, to feel, to disagree without fear of punishment. At first, reclaiming her voice feels unnatural. Years of suppression have taught her to minimize herself to survive. She might question whether her thoughts matter, whether her emotions are valid, or whether anyone will listen. But healing teaches her that her words were never the problem. The problem was being in an environment where her truth was treated as a threat. When she starts expressing herself again, she begins to rebuild the connection between her heart and her confidence. Each time she says what she truly means, she reclaims a piece of herself that was taken. Her voice becomes the bridge between her pain and her power. Through it, she learns to set boundaries, to tell her story, to define what love and respect should look like. The very thing he tried to erase becomes the tool she uses to rebuild. Speaking her truth is not about revenge. It's about restoration. It's about reminding herself that she is no longer an echo of someone else's control, but the author of her own narrative, using her words to guide herself toward wholeness and peace.